the whole truth about the life of concubines in the harem of Mongolian Khans. Greetings! Today, we are going to talk about the conditions in which concubines who were taken into the harem of the Khans of the Golden Horde lived. For what purpose the captives were transported in wagons and not accompanied on foot. Is it true that girls and women were sometimes given stale meat, which was not finished by dogs? And what fate awaited concubines who cheated on their master? Be sure to watch the video to the very end, so as not to miss anything important. Mongol Tatar yoke and the first mention of harems. As you have already probably guessed, it is about concubines at the time of invasion of Mongol Tatars to Russia. After capture of Russian lands, our state has got under the control of Golden Horde. Especially suffered the female part of the population as a result of enemy raids. To make you understand, the first mention of Mongolian harems refers to the first half of the 15th century. It was during that historical period that Islam was proclaimed as the state religion in Mongolia. It has taken place at Khan Uzbek. That's when a lot of Russian girls and women who fell into captivity to Mongolian Khans suffered. In most cases, it happened as a result of regular invasions of the enemy on settlements. Of course, someone managed to hide and thus avoid their fate. But those who could still be captured awaited lifelong torment and suffering in a foreign land. How slave girls were delivered to the Khan. It is important to note that slaves and concubines are not the same thing. At first, Russian girls and women passed the first stage. In this case, they became full-fledged slaves with fetters and chains. And then, if the Mongol Khan gave permission, the prisoners became concubines of the harem. Alas, getting into the harem was not so easy. As it should be, the initial goal was to bring the prisoners to the Khan. In this case, girls and women were divided into two categories, beautiful and ugly. The former were put in special carts so as not to harm their appearance. The latter had to walk quite a long distance with shackles and chains. Beautiful female representatives of the female sex could easily be sold. In this case, they became a full-fledged commodity. Mostly, they were sold to the eastern states, with which the Mongol Tatars established serious economic ties. Surprisingly, there were so many wagons that it was impossible to count them accurately. According to some data, it is known about the order of 5,000 Russian prisoners. Those prisoners who went behind were subjected to all sorts of insults and torture. They could easily be mocked in the case when the poor people were tired from the long walk. And only after coming to the destination finally decided the fate of the captured Russian people, either a concubine or a slave. So, let's imagine that the prisoners were finally delivered to the Khan of the Golden Horde. Exactly, he decided how to act with these or those representatives of the weaker sex. But as we know, there are two options here. Either the life of a concubine in a beautiful palace or lifelong slavery on foreign territory. Again, it all came down to the criterion of beauty. Did you know that the Mongol Tatars really appreciated the beauty of Russian women? For example, they praised the pure Caucasoid race with unique facial features. Perhaps that is why after numerous raids on Russian lands, girls and women were left alive, but nevertheless were taken captive. As for ugly women, all sorts of defects, fullness, etc., they were left alive on an equal footing with everyone else, but were given the status of slaves for life. In addition to everything else, they were tried not to be spared. They could be punished with a whip without any questions. During the day, the prisoners worked hard, and at dusk, they were taken to specially designated places. They were locked in dark cellars with unsuitable conditions. You'd be surprised, but they fed the prisoners poorly. They could easily give them stale meat that the dogs had not finished. But for girls and women who were given a completely different status, concubines of the Khan, a completely different life awaited them. Although it had its disadvantages, but it was much better than the position of powerless slaves. First, concubines lived in noble palaces with all the necessary amenities and public goods. It is enough to give the example that the Mongol Tatars 7 centuries ago already had a whole system of sewers, heat and water supply, and in Europe it appeared rather later. Secondly, the harem of the Mongol Khan treated all concubines in a special way. They were even given freedom to do many things. Girls and women ate good food, watched their appearance, and also learned to play musical instruments. During dinner, the Khan could afford to drink wine beverages accompanied by both his official wife and several concubines. On the downside, it was not easy to get used to such a life. Just imagine, the Khan of the Golden Horde could afford several official wives, mostly 4 women, and about 1,000 concubines. Another disadvantage is the cruel punishment of delinquent girls and women in the harem of their lord. Although the status of a concubine was largely different from that of a slave, no one cancelled the punishment at that time. Especially it concerned those concubines who dared to cheat on the Khan. In this case, it was already a question of execution. But if the concubine behaved properly, it had a favourable effect on her future fate. For example, the Mongol Khan had every right to give a woman to his neighbour. In the case when the Khan passed away, one of the concubines could become the wife of the younger brother of the deceased, surrounded by the official wives of the Khan of the Golden Horde. As you already know, concubines did not live alone in the harem. In this place lived all relatives of the Khan. But separately, it is worth talking about the official wives of the man. Especially the Mongol Khan valued chastity in his wives. Naturally, in this case, we are talking about women who have just started to live in the harem. In fact, these are the ones who became one of the first. We draw your attention to what privileges and rights these female representatives had. It was to the wives of the Khan in the period of the Golden Horde that a special attitude was formed. These women, along with the rulers, participated in solving issues of state importance. Plus, they were responsible for the economic component of the country, took part in councils, and even served as regents. And some of them even corresponded with the Pope. If you think that the Khan could constantly raise his voice at his wives, you are wrong. The latter, in any appropriate situation, spoke in the same tones. That's what full equality means. Interesting fact. Even in Europe there was nothing like this. And the last thing we want to emphasize is the clothes of official wives of Mongolian Khans. Basically, women wore special dresses, the length of which reached up to 2 meters. But as jewelry, gold leaf and precious stones were used, the basis of such an outfit in most cases was silk. On the head, wives of Mongol Khans wore something like a crown, and their height was about 1/2 meter. If you are suddenly interested in the cost of such clothes, we will explain. 10 years ago, as a result of archaeological excavations, was found one of these decorated dresses. So, it managed to estimate and sell it for $486,000.